Welcome to Shareholder Q&A via satellite, a production of Warcom in which we invite shareholders of companies to post questions online and have management answer them directly here via these Skype interviews. So with us today, I'm happy to have Jim Briscoe. He's President and CEO of Liberty Star Uranium. The company trades in the U.S. under the stock symbol LBSR. Now, this is part two of our Q&A. Last week, you remember, everyone at home remember that we put out part one. It was a great, thorough Q&A, and investors, I want to say it again to all the shareholders of Liberty Star, you did a fantastic job of providing some great questions, and Jim's done a fantastic job of providing beyond boilerplate answers by giving you guys some really in-depth, thorough responses. So today is part two. Jim, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, George. I appreciate this opportunity, and I'm really enjoying the opportunity to give answers to these great questions that have been posed to me.
Yeah, I think it goes out saying that everyone at home is appreciate them as well. So last week, the theme of the questions were more on the side of the business side, financing, your vision for the future, how long drilling may take, things like that. This week here, we've got a couple of questions that are a little more technical in nature, and this is important not only for shareholders at home, but Jim, you also have a lot of geologists who follow you and what you have to say, a lot of industry people, so it's important for them to get this angle as well. So we're going to start off with questions from Leith Smith. Some really good questions here that are probably even beyond my technical expertise, but first question. I would like to understand better the relationships, similarities, and differences between the stratigraphy, the sequence of geological layers found at Bisbee, Rosemont, and at Hay Mountain, as well as Tombstone, Johnson Camp, Excelsior, and Cortland Gleason, and the reasons, if known, for the original mismapping that placed the major potential ore-bearing stratum deeper at Hay Mountain than it is now known to be. How was the mistake discovered, when, and by whom? Man, that's a long question just on its own. So, Jim, I know you're prepared for this, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, I can answer all of that. It'll take you just a bit, but I'm going to have a whack at it right now. The reasons, if known, for the original mismapping that placed the major potential ore-bearing stratum and life, I'm sorry, but it is less deep than more deep because of the correct identification of the stratigraphic rock type, which is known as the Earp Formation. And yes, that's named after Earp Ridge, which is named after Wyatt Earp, or at least the Earp family, at the surface at Hay Mountain than it was previously thought to be.
How was the mistake discovered, and by whom?
I was the first one to notice that there were inconsistencies in the outcrops in the Hay Mountain drill target area to the written descriptions of the mapped formation. Red claystone in folds could be seen, and these are characteristic of the lower part of the Earp Formation, which overlies the Horquilla limestone. And these names are generally Spanish names because the type localities that they were named after, for example, Horquilla Ridge is a Spanish word, and quite frankly, I can't tell you what Horquilla means. But at any rate, these are what we call type localities, and most of them were named in Bisbee by F.L. Ransom. Okay, so the Earp Formation, which overlies the Horquilla limestone, one of the main hosts of ore in this region. And I'm going slowly, not because I don't know it, but just so that everyone can understand.
Oh yeah, it's a lot to absorb, so we appreciate that.
Okay, these units were first described by Dr. F.L. Ransom in his 1905 U.S. Geological Survey professional paper written. And we do happen to have that in our archives, and it's actually scanned in, so we can send a copy to anybody that wants one. Now, this was so rare that I never had a chance to read it before recently when we did get a computer copy. But we have these things on our iPhones and iPads, and therefore they're readily available to us in the field. But so I don't digress too much, I will continue to say that these formations are widespread throughout southeastern Arizona, northern Sonora, and western New Mexico. While there's some local variations, they are generally the same. Later on, Dr. James Gillooly, also of the USGS, with several team members, maybe as many as 10, I don't recall exactly, did extensive work and wrote a professional paper on the geology of west central Cochise County. The field work was over a very large area. My guesstimate is in excess of 1,000 square miles during the 30s, 40s, and published in the early 50s. Now, I do have to tell you, my ancestors on my father's side came from Wilcox, Arizona, which is in Cochise County. And on my mother's side, my mother's father was kind of a jack of all trades and did a lot of cowboying also in Cochise County. So I'm very, very familiar with the geography and the roads and trails in Cochise County. And I can tell you that in the 30s and 40s, my grandfather was a doctor in Wilcox from 1910 until 1948. And he drove first a buggy and then various Fords around doctoring patients in all corners. And I know from stories and personal experience that the road access was not very good. And it took a lot of time to get around, and there were no paved roads. And so we have to give these guys, these geologists, Dr. Gillooly and others, fair shakes for understanding that they couldn't get around the way we do today. But this very large area is geologically complex. It contains hundreds of mines in 5 to 6 or more mining districts. Because of the size and the complexity, there were errors in some of the details. And I'll digress again that in the area of the Hay Mountain target and over a very large area, the limestones are completely fractured and intensely veined with white quartz, probably amounting to millions of tons of white quartz if you were to squash it all together and just count the quartz. And in the main Hay Mountain area, the rock is also brecciated and formed into intrusive breccipites, further complicating the whole thing, as well as alteration to marble in some cases. So there were some errors in details, in the detailed geology, and these guys were mapping on a very large area and small scale, so a square mile wasn't a whole lot of importance to them. Where I have mapped in detail, I have found several errors, and this misidentification of the intensely shattered and folded area in the Hay Mountain target was one of them. And for the non-geologists who might be listening, limestone rocks easily fold into intense contortions when the structural geologic activity is proper. And the rocks in the Hay Mountain area initially do not look very complex, but in fact, on close examination, they are folded into complex structures that are not originally noticeable. So at any rate, when I noticed this anomaly or error in the map, I and Jay Crawford, and later we had two Skarn Rock specialist geologists, Rebecca Miller and Sarah Baxter, who separately spent significant time reading the detailed descriptions from the Galuli report and working thoroughly with Jay and I to examine the formation in extant over the Hay Mountain target, in which we almost crawled over the outcrops because they were so complex, and we also carried a big sprayer with water, 3 or 4 gallons of water, so that we could spray the rocks, because then you could see the texture of the breccias, which otherwise you can't see easily. Both Rebecca and Sarah had an advantage because they had just spent several months logging drill core and field mapping over the Rosemont ore body, which is mineralized in the very same rocks that we're talking about. All of us independently came to the same conclusion. The rock exposed at the Hay Mountain target is the lowermost or lower part of the Earth Formation limestone with interbedded red claystone. This means that the main ore hosting horizons present at Bisbee, Rosemont Camp, Johnson Camp is closely below us at Hay Mountain. And this is why the green copper oxide discovered with the Niton X-ray unit is so important. That copper is very likely leakage from shallow but massive copper mineral bodies in the favorable limestone directly below. And that is the limestone, sometimes called the Martin limestone, but at any rate, that is the limestone that tends to cause ore bodies at Bisbee and Rosemont, etc.
All right, Jim, that was a fantastic answer. I love even the anecdotes that you put in there in order to give everyone that information. The next question from Leif is, considering differences in depth, what is the practical significance of the new information?
We believe that we are perhaps within 100 to 300 foot depth above very rich limestone replacement copper gold ore bodies like those discovered at Bisbee, Rosemont, etc. The altered limestone at Hay Mountain looks very much like the limestone adjacent to the Copper Queen mine at Bisbee. And I have examined it and compared that to the Hay Mountain outcrops numerous times in the last 20 years. And I should mention that it is slightly marbleized at Bisbee and marbleized at Hay Mountain. F.L. Ransom noted that at Bisbee, early ores, when first encountered, ranged from 5 to 30% copper.
Wow.
What would be considered Anza grade even in 1905. As a result of this discovery, Bisbee became the largest town between St. Louis and San Francisco in the earliest part of the 20th century, and the largest town in Arizona for some time, devoted to mining that world-class ore body.
I'll tell you something, if you come anywhere close to 30% copper, you would be the new Saudi Arabia of copper in this world, that's for sure. My goodness, just to even say that number is pretty exciting.
It's it really is astounding, and I want to do a session on the copper cluster, which occurs in Arizona, eastern New Mexico, and northern Sonora, Mexico. But at any rate, you're absolutely right, and many people have suggested that Arizona was exhausted. And this is one guy in particular said this, and I went to John Gilbert and I said, John, do you believe that? And he said, absolutely not. And we have a map on our homepage, the occurrence of the copper gold mineralization, that may lead to many, many other big copper ore discoveries.
So the last question from Leif is, why would all this matter to a potential investor, even though I think it's obvious, but why would it matter to a potential investor? And I'm assuming he means potential investor doesn't mean to a retail investor, but a large investor would do a big private placement to finance the company.
Because if we intersect at shallow depth what could be an extremely large and rich mineral body, as suggested by all of the carefully done technical work to date that we have done, and if we intersect massive copper mineralization like at Bisbee, the stock could take a gigantic upsurge, and holders of shares at that time will have something of great value and probably do very well. But beyond that, money will flow in from many sources into our coffers for drilling out this hoped for ore body.
Yeah, and there's definitely more money out there now suddenly looking again, because the easy money in U.S. equities, and sorry to get up on a tangent very, very fast, the easy money on U.S. equities is appears to be over for now, and now investors, big fund managers have to go back looking for growth. They got to look for value in different places. So the resources are definitely back in vogue as long as at the right time. Let's go on to questions from Value Pro, who's staying on the on this technical side of things, and he asks, or she, is it possible there's continuity between the copper showings in skarn and the deeper porphyry? In other words, is there a reasonable chance that should ore grade material be encountered in the skarn, that it could run quite deep as reflected by the Z-town?
That's a wonderful question, and the answer is yes. Continuity is to be expected, as indicated by our geophysics and geochemistry, we believe. And our data suggests mineralization as deep as 5,000 feet plus. And below that, we think that our geophysics is showing the Precambrian, which is pretty much unmineralized. Bingham Canyon, Utah has discovered a 5,000 foot deep body of skarn below the open pit, and a shaft has been sunk recently, and this ore body will be produced from its great depth. At Silver Bell, where I first worked after getting out of school, I theorized 50 years ago this year that there should be a deep skarn ore bodies, or should be deep skarn ore bodies, at the base of what we then called the sub-horizontal dacite porphyry, thought to be a sill. And actually the confusion over that also relates to some of the mistakes in interpretation of James Galooly, but that's another story for another day. I got permission from my boss, the very famous James Harold Courtright, who is then head of the exploration department of ASARCO, to drill a 2,300 foot hole, which was much deeper than any of the other holes drilled in most porphyry coppers at the time. Through the PhD, and unfortunately, we bottomed in altered but non-mineralized dacite porphyry. Through the mapping done by the PhD mapping, I should say, work of Dr. David Sawyer, from the University of California, at the University of California, and I can't remember which campus.
Right.
the USGS, we now know that that dacite porphyry is actually an airfall welded tuff, and it has been renamed the Tuff of Confidence Peak. And this allowed David to correctly identify, I believe, Silverbell as a caldera, which has generated the mineral deposits similar to Tombstone. We can now see that gigantic limestone blocks will have foundered along the caldera margins to great depth, creating high-grade skarn ore bodies like I targeted unsuccessfully 50 years ago. The Silverbell caldera is much larger than David imagined, and the potential for high-grade ore bodies at Silverbell at depth is enormous. Don't be surprised to hear that this sometime in the near future. I think this shows that I generate highly productive ideas which I stick to for a very long time unless I'm clearly proven wrong. There are many opportunities in California for discoveries of additional porphyry copper deposits, and we have one of these at Hay Mountain, and I think it's worth saying that we have other targets, and we will be exploring for once Hay Mountain is taken care of. Hay Mountain needs to be drill proven, and as shareholders, you all know the benefit if you can get out the word and help me raise the money necessary to accomplish our drilling program.
Last set of questions comes from Kicked Off. And this goes back to a little more on the business side of things to end off the Q&A. Kicked Off asks, having made, I believe, numerous presentations to potential partners and investors, which have not yielded the desired outcome, have you obtained feedback that indicates to you any particular recurring sticking point, quote unquote, or obstacle that has precluded various parties going further forward? Is there a deal breaker issue common to multiple properties? So I guess what Kicked Off is really asking is there some kind of flaw in all of this that shareholders don't know about?
First, we have much more information than we had during those trips. We are still getting inquiries from these visits, and there is no official deal breaker other than greenfield projects are not popular right now, and particularly unpopular with the Chinese. And this is because of the social structure of China, I believe, and also characteristic of the Japanese and most Asians. I could write a book on the subtleties of the interactions we have had with the Chinese, but because of those various factors, they are not explorers in the true sense of the word. We do have one sticking point that has to do with the size and area of mutual interest and the confidentiality period that would be off limits for any potential investor if they looked at our data and then rejected the project. Several large companies have rejected our 25-year confidentiality proposed agreement and instead offering 2 years. Well, let me jump back into history. I've been working on Hay Mountain sporadically but relatively diligently over the last 40 years. I'm really not interested in having some non-participant just swoop in and make use of all of my time and effort as well as the effort of the shareholders of Liberty Star without proper compensation to us. So we actually had one refusal from one company that had flown in from Denver, and for certain reasons not related to us, they didn't sign the didn't even know about the confidentiality agreement until they got here ready for the tour early in the morning at the hotel that we were going to pick them up at. And they simply refused to sign it because they said, well, we only agreed to 2 years, and we met a counter offer of 10 years, and they said, no, 2 years. And we said, well, sorry you made the trip from Denver, but we can't do that. Have a good day. And when asked, these companies, what would they do in 2 years, they retort, nothing. We say then, if you will do nothing, then sign the confidentiality agreement for 25 years. That is not our policy, is the retort, the common retort. We do know of one famous ore finder that is trying to horn in on our target, but we think we're well protected. I can't talk about this in detail right now, but in due time my reasons will be revealed, and shareholders, I believe, will be very pleased. Further, we are in the worst metals downturn in the memory of anyone now living. Many companies, large and small, are being taken over or going bankrupt. So it's particularly hard for our potential funders or joint venture partners to get enthused right now when most are just holding on and trying to stay alive. But no one is ignoring us. I'll give you one anecdote where we met with one senior executive of a very large Chinese copper company, metals company, and he greeted us in the parking lot below his twin towers where he had probably 2,000 people working for him. And he said, I have a meeting to go to that I can't avoid, so I came down here to greet you and apologize that I can only spend about 5 minutes with you. So he escorted us up to the very large conference room on the top floor of one of the buildings, and I started to make my presentation on my iPad, and he continued to be attentive, and the clock moved over from 5 minutes to 10 minutes to 15 minutes, and quite quickly he got to interacting with my iPad and moving things around, and at any rate, the meeting lasted 45 minutes. He finally revealed that he was actually a geophysicist and he knew most about those things. And he was very, very interested, very polite, but very apologetic that it was a corporate policy of not doing greenfields or grassroots exploration. So that is the sticky point with the Chinese. But no one is ignoring this. We believe that we're far enough away from any environmentally sensitive areas that will not be put through the ringer like Rosemont Camp and the Resolution Mine. But our team works on this project every day, and we never know when the project potential will click with a contact. I had breakfast a few days ago with a geochemist who asked to meet with me, who it turns out is a native of Bisbee. He, his father, and grandfather worked in the mines. I described the project, and he immediately said he had contacts in Hong Kong who would like this, and he will immediately get in contact with them. So we're waiting for that. But because he knew the geography of Hay Mountain very thoroughly and the geology, he could immediately identify with it and saw its potential. So raising money is always difficult, but I had no notice that he was going to be such an enthusiast about the project. So raising money is very difficult and it's hard work, but I work on it every day, and I never know when I will strike a receptive chord with an investor. Another anecdote, our quickest raise from an investor who I did not know called me up with an invitation for lunch that day, saying he just wanted to talk with me. I accepted, and the next day, a Friday, it was the next day that we had lunch. I discussed our objectives, and on Monday we had $1 million private placement. Wow. And the cash from which was in our bank on Tuesday. So one never knows but that's why I work on it hard every day.
And the last question from Kicked Off, which is also going to be the last question of the entire Q&A, is at what point or milestone along the realistically desired or typical development trajectory would you consider your direct involvement, quote, no longer required for project viability?
I think that I answered some of this in a previous question, but I don't mind addressing it again. I have some very important operational and environmental contributions to make. At some point, I would retreat into an advisory role, but perhaps a long time in the future.
I would think that's probably fair to say, we'll end up on this, that would happen either at the point where you had a big JV partner come in and they're spending millions and millions of their own money, and you're kind of advising, but they're doing most of the legwork, and or a situation where a big company might want to actually just buy the project and start building the mine outright themselves. So, but that would be pretty far time in the future.
Well, I want to be sure that I have the input into the environmental and aesthetic aspects of building a truly innocuous but very large and very profitable mine, which I think can be done. And that's one of the inputs that I want to have.
Jim, I want to thank you so much for participating in a two-part Q&A with your investors, which we've never actually done before. So hats off to the investors at home who took the time to give us some really deep probing questions that put Jim to task a little bit, because they weren't softball questions, and I like that. And Jim, you did a fantastic job of getting detailed, getting anecdotal, and helping people really understand each phase of their questions and how they relate to the company. So thank you so much for doing this.
George, it was my pleasure, and I love this opportunity to take and answer questions from our shareholders, and I will always do that as rapidly as I possibly can, and I'm certainly open to visiting with shareholder groups around the country or in foreign lands if the opportunity arises. So, thanks again.
Thank you, Jim. You've been listening to Jim Briscoe. He's President and CEO of Liberty Star Uranium. The company trades on the stock symbol LBSR. And if you want more information about the company, you can always get to its website, or, as always, get to Agoracom, where you can ask questions on a regular basis, get your questions answered, or read the questions and answers pertaining to other shareholders' communications on the site. It's all moderated and civilized, so that you can also have a very constructive and informative session whenever you're on Agoracom. Thanks to everyone at home for listening. We look forward to doing this again with you in the near future. Now that the company's quiet period is over and the company will be a little more active, we're anticipating more interviews and more interaction with Jim. So thanks to everyone at home. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you next time.